Oh, I was there. Hated the day. The day was a miserable day. I mean, it was a
Really? I thought.
well, was it? Well, I can tell you now. It was the worst royal engagement I ever did. A royal wedding I ever did. You know, I thought to myself, you know, this is all showbiz rubbish.
You're absolutely right. I mean, what I discovered was, of course, that she was hunting for a man, and there's no doubt she targeted Harry.
The whole thing was just stage managed to suit them.
This is not the Harry he was a few years ago. And the only reason he's not like that is he's following the requests of Meghan. He said himself, what Meghan wants, Meghan gets.
And so he was angry, and I felt, you know.
Just before dawn in California, a tightly guarded message reached Meghan and Harry from a palace intermediary. It contained no greeting, no reassurance, and no promise of negotiation. Yet hidden behind its carefully chosen words was a warning. Charles had already made a decision that could not be undone. For weeks, Meghan had waited for confirmation that her appeal had reached the king himself. The message had moved through lawyers, private advisors, and trusted figures who understood that one careless phrase could destroy any remaining chance of reconciliation. Nobody wanted to place the request directly into official channels, where it could be recorded, circulated, and quietly buried beneath palace procedure. Then confirmation finally arrived. Charles had read it, but this was not a simple request to end a family disagreement. Meghan's plea allegedly reached into the most sensitive corners of royal life. It concerned her future relationship with the monarchy, the position of Archie and Lilibet, and whether there remained one last path through which the Sussex family could return without surrendering everything they had built outside Britain. Harry had warned her that the timing was dangerous. To him, the palace no longer heard emotional appeals as expressions of pain. It heard demands. It saw pressure. Every private request was examined for hidden consequences, and every promise of peace was weighed against years of damaged trust. Meghan believed waiting would be even more dangerous. She reportedly framed the appeal around family, legacy, and Charles's grandchildren. She spoke of isolation, misunderstanding, and assurances allegedly made before she and Harry stepped away from royal duties. The message was not written as a threat. It was written as a final chance. Almost no one knew it existed. Only a small circle understood that Meghan was asking for more than kindness. She wanted recognition, protection from future public humiliation, and some form of restored connection to the royal world from which she believed she had been pushed. The palace acknowledged receiving the message. Then, nothing happened. That silence became its own answer. Meghan searched every brief communication for a sign that Charles was still considering her words. Harry wanted his father to soften, but he understood the machinery now surrounding him. Charles was no longer deciding as a wounded parent alone. William's concerns, legal advice, senior courtiers, and the future stability of the crown were all pressing against whatever private sympathy remained. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Before Meghan's plea had even arrived, palace officials had allegedly begun drafting an internal statement addressing rumors of her return. The language was already firm. The boundaries were already being defined. It suggested that Meghan's final appeal had not reopened the discussion at all. It had entered a room where the decision was already waiting, and as Meghan waited for a private answer from the king, the palace was already confronting a darker question. What exactly was she asking Charles to give back? The request was described as personal, but its consequences reached far beyond one wounded relationship. Meghan was not simply asking Charles for forgiveness. She was allegedly asking for access, recognition, and a renewed place inside a system that had spent years protecting itself from her return. Behind the careful language of family healing or demands the palace could not treat as private, Meghan allegedly wanted direct access to Charles without every conversation passing through layers of officials. She wanted formal recognition at future family occasions, clearer standing for Archie and Lilibet, and an end to what she and Harry believed had become a deliberate pattern of exclusion. She was also seeking guarantees. Any future return to Britain could not leave her isolated, placed far from senior royals, or presented to the public as someone tolerated rather than welcomed. Meghan understood how royal events worked. A seat, an entrance, or a position in a procession could send a message louder than any palace statement. She feared being invited only to be visibly diminished. Then came the more sensitive questions: titles, legacy, and inheritance. The plea did not allegedly demand money, but it reached towards something the monarchy guarded just as fiercely: belonging. Meghan wanted assurance that her children's royal connection would not exist merely on paper. She wanted Archie and Lilibet to have a recognizable place within the family's future, not simply names attached to a distant history. To palace officials, that was where the danger began. One concession could become a precedent. One family invitation could be interpreted as restoring influence without restoring duty. Meghan could regain royal visibility while remaining beyond the rules, discipline, and silence demanded of working members of the monarchy. Meghan saw the situation differently. She believed the institution continued to benefit from her name. Her image still drove headlines. Her conflict with the palace still shaped royal coverage. Yet when she sought direct engagement, she was met with barriers, intermediaries, and silence. Harry understood both sides, and that knowledge tormented him. He supported his wife's appeal, but he knew every sentence would be judged through the history of interviews, public accusations, and private conversations that had later entered the public domain. Charles reportedly considered a limited family meeting. William opposed it. He warned that Meghan's return, however restricted, would revive every unresolved grievance. Catherine's position mattered too. Even without speaking publicly, her presence beside Meghan at a major ceremony could ignite worldwide speculation and reopen old wounds. The pressure intensified because Meghan's plea carried a deadline linked to an approaching royal occasion. Charles could not delay forever, and within the draft response was the boundary that would define everything. Meghan could still be acknowledged as family, but not restored as part of the working monarchy. But before Charles could answer, another figure stepped into the private debate, and his warning transformed Meghan's emotional appeal into a battle over the survival of royal authority. William did not need to raise his voice. According to those familiar with the palace mood, his position was delivered with the quiet certainty of a future king. Meghan's return, even for one symbolic moment, would not heal the monarchy. It would place every buried grievance back beneath the lights. His resistance was not built around one insult, one interview, or one broken relationship. William allegedly believed the monarchy had already endured too many attempts at reconciliation that began in private and ended before the world. Each emotional conversation carried the same risk. Every concession could later become a headline, a documentary revelation, or another chapter in a public account of royal betrayal. Trust had become the real barrier. Palace officials could arrange a meeting, but they could not guarantee the meeting would remain sacred. They could offer Meghan a place at one ceremony, but they could not control how that invitation would be described afterward. For William, reopening the door meant inviting uncertainty back into the heart of the crown. When Harry learned that his brother had advised Charles against the plea, the decision felt deeply personal. He did not see William as protecting the institution. He saw him standing between a father and son, using his future authority to control the present king. Old wounds immediately returned. William believed Harry's determination to restore Meghan's position challenged the monarchy's order and exposed it to further instability. Harry believed William had turned family pain into a question of succession, loyalty, and power. Catherine's position made the situation even more delicate. She allegedly did not demand that Meghan be excluded. Instead, she drew a quieter boundary. She would not participate in a staged reconciliation created for public display. Any forced greeting, shared appearance, or carefully arranged ceremony could revive accusations neither woman wanted to confront again. Officials prepared 3 possible paths. Charles could authorize a private family meeting. He could permit a restricted ceremonial invitation, or he could reject the request completely. None offered peace. A private meeting risked disclosure. A limited invitation risked humiliation. Rejection risked losing Harry forever. Charles hesitated because he was being pulled in 2 directions. The father feared permanent separation from his son. The king feared appearing weak, inconsistent, and vulnerable to emotional pressure. Camilla allegedly warned that compromise would satisfy nobody. Meghan would interpret restrictions as another public slight, while William would consider any invitation a violation of the boundary he had fought to protect. Late that night, Charles reviewed Meghan's appeal line by line. Then, he asked the question that silenced the room. What happens the day after we let her back in? The answer came not from William or Camilla, but from palace lawyers. Their document outlined the constitutional, security, and public consequences of restoring even limited official access, and its conclusion left almost no space for emotion. That document forced Charles to choose between the son he feared losing and the crown he had sworn to protect. And by morning, the king's answer was ready. The answer arrived without ceremony. There was no phone call from Charles, no invitation to negotiate, and no language suggesting the matter could be reopened. Meghan's final plea had been reviewed at the highest level, and the king's response made one brutal reality impossible to deny. Charles had rejected the request. The message stated that Meghan would not be restored to an official, semi-official, or publicly recognized royal role. There would be no special position, no renewed ceremonial standing, and no arrangement allowing her to represent the monarchy from outside its working structure. The distinction was carefully drawn. Private family contact remained possible. Institutional return did not. Meghan allegedly read the response twice. The first time, she searched for warmth. The second, she searched for an opening. There was neither. Every sentence appeared designed to prevent further negotiation, and one passage carried the full weight of the decision. Future appearances, ceremonies, and official family occasions would be determined by the needs of the crown, not by the expectations of Meghan and Harry. That sentence destroyed the central protections Meghan had sought. The palace would not guarantee where she would sit, how she would enter, whom she would stand beside, or whether she would be included at all. What Meghan viewed as protection from public humiliation, royal officials treated as a demand for influence without duty. Harry's anger was immediate. To him, Charles had not merely refused Meghan. He had chosen courtiers, constitutional advice, and William's judgment over his own son and grandchildren. Every careful phrase sounded like the voice of the institution speaking through a father who had once promised that family would still matter. Meghan reacted differently. She did not erupt. Her silence was more unsettling. She had expected restrictions, delays, perhaps even another attempt to avoid a decision. She had not expected Charles to declare that the matter itself was finished. The king did acknowledge the pain separating the family. He expressed regret that relationships had deteriorated so severely. But there was no apology, no proposed meeting, and no suggestion that Meghan's position might be reviewed later. Inside the palace, the reasoning was blunt. Meghan could not retain the visibility, authority, and advantages connected to royal status while remaining outside the obligations, confidentiality, and discipline of royal service. William supported that conclusion. Constitutional advisors examined it. Security officials assessed it. Communications teams prepared for the reaction. Then came the second blow. The palace was not planning to let the Sussexes reveal the rejection on their own terms. Officials were already preparing to make the boundary public, fearing that delay would allow the decision to be presented as cruelty, retaliation, or personal punishment. The answer had closed the private conversation. The announcement would close the public door. And while Meghan struggled to absorb the king's answer in private, palace officials moved to ensure the world understood that this was not another temporary disagreement, it was the closing of an era. For years, the palace had survived through silence, allowing uncertainty to protect both sides. But this time, silence was considered too dangerous. Behind closed doors, officials drafted language that would erase every rumor of Meghan's return and turn Charles's private rejection into an unmistakable royal boundary. The message was not released as a direct attack. It was colder than that. Palace sources began confirming that there were no discussions about Meghan resuming royal duties, receiving a special representative role, or standing beside senior members of the family in any official capacity. The wording avoided insult, blame, and emotion. Yet its meaning was impossible to soften. Meghan remained part of the king's family. She was no longer part of the monarchy's working structure. Officials believed that distinction had to be made public because years of speculation were beginning to create problems inside the palace. Every rumor of reconciliation affected ceremonial planning. Every suggestion that Meghan might return raised questions about seating, security, precedence, titles, and who would be expected to appear beside her. Charles could not continue allowing expectations to grow around an outcome he had already rejected. Future invitations would now be handled one event at a time. Nothing would be guaranteed. Not a balcony appearance, not a procession, not a state occasion. Not even access to the private royal spaces Meghan once entered as a working duchess. When the palace position reached the press, Meghan allegedly saw it as more than clarification. She believed it was an attempt to humiliate her before she could explain what she had asked for and why. Her private plea had been transformed into a public boundary, and the institution had moved first. Harry was furious. He accused palace advisors of weaponizing his father's decision, turning family pain into a warning meant for the entire world. To him, the message was not simply that Meghan could not return. It was that the palace wanted everyone to know she had been refused. The public battle began almost immediately. Supporters of the Sussexes described the decision as cruel, calculated, and vindictive. Royal defenders called it necessary after years of mistrust and public confrontation. Both sides claimed the language proved their case. Behind the scenes, another review was already underway. Palace officials were examining whether titles, commercial projects, and future appearances could create confusion about Meghan's position. The fear was simple. She could remain publicly associated with royal authority while having no responsibility to the institution itself. Could Charles reconsider one day? Those close to the palace insisted this was not a pause. Private contact with Harry remained possible, but Meghan's official return was no longer being discussed. William did not celebrate. His response was restrained, almost grim. But beneath it was relief. The line had finally been drawn. Then Meghan reportedly made a declaration that changed the direction of the conflict. If the palace had closed its door, she would no longer protect the people standing behind it. But Meghan's next move would not be guided by grief alone, because buried inside Charles's rejection was another threat, one involving titles, inheritance, and the royal future of her children. Meghan could accept being excluded from a procession. She could survive another wave of palace briefings. But when the consequences began reaching toward Archie and Lilibet, the rejection became something far more personal, a struggle over whether her children would inherit royal belonging or only its burden. The titles remained, at least for now. But the palace position carried a colder message beneath that surface reassurance. A title did not guarantee a role, financial support, ceremonial access, or a meaningful place in the monarchy's future. Archie and Lilibet could carry royal names while growing further away from the institution those names represented. That possibility cut deeper than Meghan's own exclusion. She allegedly feared that closing the door on her would quietly close it on her children as well. They might inherit the scrutiny, expectations, and controversy attached to royal blood without receiving the protection, recognition, or sense of belonging that should have come with it. Then came the question nobody wanted discussed publicly: inheritance. Personal wealth, private family possessions, crown property, historic jewels, and royal archives were not governed by one simple rule. Some items could be passed down privately, others belonged to the institution. Many remained under traditions so old and carefully protected that even senior family members could not claim them freely. Meghan reportedly wanted clarity, not a fortune, not a public gift. She wanted to know whether Archie and Lilibet would one day receive anything that connected them directly to their grandfather's reign and their great-grandmother's legacy. Harry's anger hardened. He believed the palace treated his children as royal symbols when their names supported the image of continuity, then as outsiders whenever their presence became inconvenient. To him, the contradiction was unbearable. Charles's position was more painful. He allegedly wanted contact with his grandchildren. But he refused to allow that relationship to become tied to Meghan's official status, ceremonial demands, or negotiations with the crown. The original plea may even have asked that Archie and Lilibet appear at selected future occasions, not as working royals, but as part of the king's family and legacy. William resisted. He feared such appearances would create a parallel royal household, publicly connected to the monarchy, commercially independent, and beyond palace control. Another dispute reportedly involved old family traditions, christening objects, private portraits, archived letters, and jewels associated with royal children. Meghan believed some of these should eventually pass to Archie and Lilibet. Palace lawyers warned that any public battle over such items could become more destructive than another interview. For the first time, Meghan considered revealing promises allegedly made before the Sussexes left Britain. Assurances about family inclusion, the children's future, and the ties that would supposedly remain untouched. Before she could decide, Harry received a personal message from Charles. It offered father and son a private path forward. But Meghan would not be part of the first meeting. The offer appeared to be the reconciliation Harry had wanted for years, yet accepting it would mean walking toward his father while leaving Meghan outside the very door she had begged Charles to open. Charles had rejected Meghan, but he had not completely rejected Harry. That distinction created the most dangerous fracture yet. The king was offering his son a private path back into the family, one built on silence, separation, and a condition Harry knew Meghan would never be able to ignore. The proposal was deliberately simple. No cameras, no advisors, no public announcement. Charles wanted a conversation between father and son, not a negotiation between the crown and the Duke of Sussex. But the condition was equally clear. Meghan would not attend, and the meeting would not reopen discussion about her royal position. For Harry, the offer was both everything he had wanted and everything he feared. Accepting might repair something between him and his father. It could create the first honest conversation they had shared in years. Yet it could also look like surrender, as though he were willing to move forward while leaving Meghan's rejection untouched. Meghan immediately understood the danger. She feared the palace was trying to isolate Harry, weaken their united position, and draw him back into the royal system under terms she could never accept. To her, the meeting was not simply private. It was strategic. Harry pushed back. He insisted that no reconciliation could be genuine while his wife continued to be treated as the cause of every fracture. Meghan had become the explanation for broken trust, public conflict, and family distance. In Harry's mind, that allowed everyone else to avoid responsibility. Charles saw it differently. He believed the relationship with his son could never heal if every conversation became tied to Meghan's status, institutional demands, and public consequences. He wanted one meeting free from negotiation. William remained suspicious. He feared Harry would use the conversation to press Meghan's case again, turning a private exchange into another attempt to force the palace door open. Because of that, strict conditions were discussed. No recording. No written account. No immediate briefing afterward. Those restrictions reopened old wounds. Harry remembered the moments when he had believed Charles would protect him, only to watch duty take priority. Again and again, the father disappeared behind the king. Meghan finally told Harry he could attend. Her permission sounded calm, but it carried a warning. The palace, she said, might not be inviting him back. It might be testing whether he could be separated from her. Harry delayed his answer. To Charles, the silence suggested that even a private meeting was now impossible. To Meghan, it proved Harry understood the cost. And while he hesitated, discussions reportedly began around a new public response, an interview, statement, memoir project, or documentary account revealing what had happened during the final plea. Harry now faced the truth he had avoided. The palace door remained slightly open for him, but walking through it might cost him the life, loyalty, and marriage he had built outside. And as Harry stood between his father and his wife, Meghan prepared a response of her own one that could turn Charles's final rejection into the monarchy's next global crisis. Charles believed a clear decision would end the uncertainty. Instead, it may have removed the last restraint holding Meghan and Harry back. The palace door was closed. The private appeal was over. And both sides were now free to tell the world why reconciliation had finally become impossible. Meghan's disappointment quickly hardened into resolve. She would no longer wait for approval from an institution that had formally denied her return. In her view, silence had protected the palace for years while leaving her to carry the weight of its decisions. Now, that silence no longer served her. Inside the Sussex circle, discussions allegedly began about releasing their version of the final plea. What had Meghan asked for? Which parts had Charles considered? Who had urged him to refuse? Every answer carried the power to challenge the palace's carefully controlled explanation. The monarchy prepared for that possibility. Advisors anticipated accusations of cruelty, manipulation, racism, and emotional abandonment. Statements were reviewed. Old correspondence was reconsidered. The palace knew that one leaked message could turn a private rejection into a global confrontation. Internally, Charles's decision brought order. Ceremonial planning became easier. Senior royals no longer had to prepare for Meghan's possible return. Yet the same clarity that strengthened the crown may have destroyed the king's relationship with Harry. William accepted that risk. To him, permanent distance was painful, but endless instability was worse. Catherine remained silent, aware that any new account from Meghan could revive old claims and place her back at the center of a conflict she had never publicly answered. Camilla reportedly urged Charles not to react emotionally. Every denial could create another accusation. Every explanation could reveal more than it settled. The safest response, she believed, was discipline, but the deepest consequences belonged to Archie and Lilibet. Years from now, they might ask why they carried royal titles without royal belonging, why family history surrounded them while the family itself remained distant. Harry faced an equally painful future. Continue confronting the crown, and he might lose what remained of his father. Step back, and Meghan could feel abandoned at the moment the palace had rejected her most completely. This had never been about one request. It was the result of years of broken trust, private wounds, public warfare, and two opposing ideas of royal power. Meghan wanted recognition without surrender. The palace demanded duty before access. Charles may have protected the monarchy by closing the door, but in doing so, he may have locked his son, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren permanently on the other side. And one final danger remained. Meghan allegedly still possessed a piece of palace correspondence capable of challenging the official explanation. If released, it could force Charles to defend the decision he believed had ended everything. Because the palace may have declared the matter finished, but in the royal family, a closed door does not bury the truth, it only determines who will reveal it first.